All right, what is going on, everyone, and welcome back to the Mets Weekly Podcast as we are live at this very moment on YouTube and on X to discuss the latest news and rumors all off-season long in Mets land. But before we do that, I want to remind everyone to subscribe to the Mets Weekly YouTube channel for weekly episodes of our show that are now recorded live every Monday night, typically at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, and that will be the same scheduling as for spring training, as before we get into the regular season. For those of you watching or listening on playback, you want to join the conversation in the future, make sure to turn on those post notifications to know when we go live. For those of you in the live chat right now, we love reading your comments, your questions, your concerns, and if you feel like you're being ignored, you aren't being ignored. You're just being starred throughout the show. We'll try to pull up as many comments as we can to keep the flow of the conversation going. Make sure to follow Mets Weekly on X and on TikTok for future content over there. For our audio listeners, make sure to follow us on all of your favorite listening platforms to not miss the audio version of new episodes that go up at 9 a.m. the following day. And if you want to be a part of our show on air later on, live right here, make sure to call into our brand new 24/7 hotline with questions and comments, etc. That is 845-208-5677, and leave us a message, which we prefer to be under 3 minutes long. Please refrain from using offensive and derogatory language and keep it Mets related. All calls will be pre-screened for obvious reasons, and numbers will be blocked if you do violate any of these rules. It is a one-strike policy. Mets fans, we want to hear what you have to say. Give us your brutal, honest opinions like we do every single week. That is 845-208-5677, and you could be featured at the end of tonight's show, 845-208-5677. So without further ado, let's get into episode number 115. And now we have passed the threshold of football season, and officially baseball is next. We are very, very close to pitchers and catchers reporting. We have seen players already getting the early work in. Yesterday, of course, the Super Bowl and, the end of everything, the big celebration, huge win for my Philadelphia Eagles, beating up the absolute most disgusting creation known to man in the world, known as the Kansas City Chiefs. And for those of you in that information, I'm a Raiders fan, so I will never root for the Chiefs in any circumstance whatsoever. But as for baseball, Frank, I am joined by one of my co-hosts, Frank. I think that it's very, very exciting when you get to see that first of content coming from Port St. Lucie. It's all kind of laid back. Maybe there's a little bit of stress involved as to, what has been going on in terms of the team, and maybe they keep adding or doing whatever because they still have time to do that. But now it has officially become real. The 2025 Mets are now officially a reality. Lots of drama, of course, towards the very end. There always is. But I mean, what is the feel of this first semi-whiff of spring training that we have been getting these last 48 hours?
It is good to see players that are employed by the New York Mets on a baseball field doing baseball things. And that was what we saw today. I mean, we saw Lindor, Nimmo, Francisco Alvarez. They're not even supposed to technically report yet, but plenty of the guys are already there because, they're eager to get started. So it's just very exciting to see. Like you said, I mean, this is what we wait for. We're getting to mid-February, so the games are right around the corner. I mean, next Saturday is the Mets' first game. So, I mean, it is going to get started very soon, and just really excited to get it going.
Yeah, obviously, I think that right now, we're kind of just getting into those swings of things, and we're starting to hear, players talk to the media a little bit, and maybe we'll, sprinkle that in and out of when we talk about the, spring roster that actually just came out earlier today, because there are some things that we do need to discuss in regards to that. But, I think that it's really, really easy as to where you can just sit back, see what's been going on with some of these players over the off season. They talk or whatever, whether you want to overreact or not of what's been going on, make your jokes or whatever. The baseball season's young at this current moment. And I think that when they start playing games, then it'll start to be a little bit more real. And, it's always great when something new starts up, of course, especially when you just get like a full-on break from it. But, the overall craziness of this offseason, which I would say is continuing to be very, very slow. And there are still players out there that are available that are well of note. Some that could get short-term deals, other guys that are out there that maybe I don't know if the Mets are connected to, but they've talked about being opportunistic. But I think moving forward, right now we're kind of just looking at what we have in front of us. And it seems like, we're getting a little bit more excited in the fact that we're seeing guys actually play baseball. We're seeing actual videos of this stuff. But there's also, that little element of some of the new players and some of this type of stuff, but it's without that type of stress. CP coming in, one of our fellow Mets creators, saying Jonah Tung content gave me some life today. I believe that's because he's a big Giants fan, did not want to see the Eagles win. Me being the big Eagles fan, I really wanted that to happen. So I think that, Mets fans are willing to move on because there's a lot of New York fans as Mets fans. So it's good to have baseball back. And, and I think that right now Mets fans are getting excited now, especially after what this offseason has brought. There's a certain someone that I cannot wait to see on this team for the next 15 years. And, and also the re-signing of a certain player that happened less than a week ago, which we'll get into in a second. But let's get into the chat real quick. Darren Rivera saying LGM. Absolutely. Stanley coming in here saying hello. Brad also tuning in. Truro saying no Andrew tonight. No, there is no Andrew tonight, but he will be back. He did not ditch us completely, but just not tonight. He will be here. So you're just going to have to deal with me and Frank screaming at each other with our counteracting opinions. CP saying call into the hotline. That is true. And complimenting Nick Madrigal. If you want to talk about this for a second, I think it's probably one of the funniest things like ever that Nick Madrigal is a Met. I think that it's the fact of like the shadow being like casted behind me, right? And I'm not trying to make this completely about me, but like we've talked about the different ways where, I'm not a big fan of Nick Madrigal, of me trolling with him and the whole Jet Williams conversation and him being the flock prospect that he is. But it's like, we didn't really do like a big story about it or anything. We didn't really talk about it craziness. But, we'll talk about him in terms of the, formula that he'll be in with the second base situation. But it's so funny to me. I saw people on social media kind of making fun of him bringing in a Cubs bag or whatever into spring training, which it seems like all the new players do anyway. But it's funny. It's funny to me. Let's just say that it's really funny. I'm not really mad about it because I don't think that this is going to be a big story unless he goes to the big level heights of the top prospect that he was. But it's possibly one of the funniest things ever, I would say. I don't know if you have like the same feel of it, just because like maybe it's just people who know me and we've watched this show so much and have been on our show for a long time and have watched us since the beginning. I think that it's just so funny. And I feel like, most of our Mets fan friends, our fellow content creators, were definitely thinking of me and my very opinionated rule on him when they signed him. So it was funny. I don't know. I think it still is funny personally. But if he ends up playing a big role on this team, we might be in trouble. I'm just going to say, but you had to have somebody replace the Joey Wendell type of move. So who knows?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. You don't want to see him become Joey Wendell, but right now, with the Iglesias still being unsigned, and we've talked about with Acuna, we feel like he should be playing full-time, and his best chance of doing that is in Syracuse. So when you look at this Mets 40-man roster, I mean, all of a sudden, Nick Madrigal, like, there is a decent chance he's on the opening day lineup
Might be.
because he has played multiple positions in second base and third base. Has not played shortstop in the major leagues. I mean, he did a little bit in college, but other than that, you don't really have many other guys that could do that on this 40-man roster. I mean, Brett Beatty obviously can't do it. So I am curious to see what happens. And it's funny you mentioned the whole Cubs bag. He's the one guy on the Mets 40-man roster page on MLB.com where he's wearing a Cubs hat. Everyone else has Mets hats on, and they usually do it pretty quick. Like, the guy will sign with the Mets within the next couple of days, like with Minter, those other guys, like, boom, they have a Mets hat. He still has a Cubs hat on, so I don't know why he's, like, the one guy that is not getting updated. So it is very strange, but I did think it was funny when I first saw it, and I almost couldn't believe it, because we joked about, you joked about the comparisons of Jeff McNeil to Nick Madrigal, and you're like, listen, why would I want a second baseman that has no power? Why would I want a guy, Jeff McNeil, who reminds me of Nick Madrigal? And sure enough, both of them are Mets, and it's like, I mean, here's the good news for you, Carson, is that let's say Jeff McNeil needs a day off, boom, you put Nick Madrigal in. So you still get that same production, and you still have somebody to love in the lineup no matter what.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I feel like we have a really good noodle depth, like we have a really good noodle depth on this team right now. I just thought it was like hilarious to see like the fact that we had to like kind of put in somebody of like that type of caliber to kind of line up the rest of the roster, possibly because of how highly I've talked about Jose Iglesias, not just last year, but for a while, and kind of talking about him in that way of being maybe a possible option to help push the young kids. Then they just go this completely different direction and sign Mick Madrigal. And it's funny because, and it seems like it is somewhat of a Iglesias replacement as time continues to go on. It seems like he is wearing 11, is what I heard. So I don't know. Is Iglesias gone for good? Who knows? But it seems like the Mets really right now are kind of keeping all of their options open, and I don't think it's going to stop them from possibly bringing somebody back or signing someone. Maybe there is other moves that are made, but looking at things that are currently in front of them, and also as well as the surplus of second basemen they have on this 40-man roster alone, also in this organization as a whole, it's very, very different in this way where the Mets don't really have to see these ways of just, these types of player competitions of one of these guys is going to have to do it, because I feel like they do have a decent, surplus in that way. And we will talk about the second base situation regarding Luisangel Acuna later. But I do want to talk about a signing that I think more Mets fans are happy about, and especially Mets fans that are just happy for this just to be done, and that being Pete Alonso's free agency that has finally come to a close, and to a happy close on the Mets side, as the Mets have re-signed Pete Alonso. We did go live for the instant reaction for this, but we will break down some of the things of what it looks like with Pete Alonso back into the mix. And we did get some quotes from our front office, our owner, Steve Cohen, about the negotiations and things like that. There were some other contract offers in the mix there as well. But let's just say this has been quite the experience, quite the draining experience that we're happy is over. And let's just give a little recap of the long road back home. So, as we all know, the Mets signed him to a 2-year, $54 million contract. And as for some of the other offers that were out there, Will Salmon on Twitter /X, whatever you want to call it, said that the Mets were offering Alonso a different 3-year deal. Obviously, he took the 2-year deal. The 3-year deal was $71 million at 27 million in the first year and $22 million in the second and third years. Instead, Alonso chose the higher first-year value that came with the 2-year deal, and of course, $30 million. Including a $10 million signing bonus. As for the other contract details, a $20 million base salary for 2024. It is a $27 million CBT luxury tax hit, as it is $27 million AAV. a 2024 player option for 2026, $30 million in accumulated cash, and in overall, I think adjusted salary, it's about 24 million. It's basically just swung around in the signing bonus, but 27 million is the thought of it right now for the luxury tax. And it would be for 2026 if he were to opt into that second year. But we also see it from the rankings as of right now. If you are including arbitration salaries, the AAV of 27 million puts Pete Alonso second right now, or tied for second in AAV with Freddie Freeman. And he is second behind Vladimir Guerrero Jr., which is 28.5 million. But again, he has not hit the free agent market yet. We're expecting him to get to the $30 million a year possibility. Is it possible at the trajectory of his career that is an overpay in AAV? Most likely. But we've talked about it from another angle of, you have to overpay in some way in order to get somewhat of a thing done. And the Mets overpaid in AAV or, total AAV. And they did not overpay in years, which seemed like to be the hesitant thing with not just the Mets, but the overall feel of the free agent market, where teams were just reluctant to give him a long-term deal. Now, as for Steve Cohen, he did tell John Heyman of the New York Post about, the ending resolution of these negotiations, saying that I wanted to humanize the negotiations. I wanted him to hear it straight from me. Two humans having a conversation. I was clear. I told him, I want you back. We want you back. And that it seemed like that was the words that stuck with them, and they were able to find common ground in this deal. A lot of things we can unpack in this way of the final negotiations with Pete Alonso. I would say that if you're looking at this from an overall standpoint of this contract, I don't know if this is how you feel, Frank. I feel like both sides, they won in the best way possible that they could at the amount of time that this was taking from the very beginning. And, Pete Alonso is back for 2025. We know where he's going to play this year. We don't know what his future is holding, but I would say that right now, this is the best case scenario for both sides after a very, very long stage of negotiations that even Steve Cohen publicly put on notice a few weeks ago. Can you guys hear Frank? I don't know if he may.
We're good now.
There we go. All right. Perfect.
I would say, considering the Blue Jays were the other team in the mix, I do think it is nice the Mets were able to pull off this deal because we know that Toronto is willing to spend a lot of money. So for them to still get him, and like you said, they overpaid with money and not with years, which I feel like that is the Steve Cohen advantage, that you can do that, where like other teams that are so concerned with money that they might go extra years when they really don't want to, just so they could kind of not have that same AAV. So that was nice. The Mets were able to still get that done. And I think the big thing for me is that we obviously saw Pete pressing this season. I mean, there was no doubt about it. I feel like it really goes to show, like, with his numbers, like with men on base. So it felt like the more they needed Pete, the more that he struggled. So, like, the more pressure that was on, the more pressure he put on himself, and he was not able to be successful. So what I'm hoping is that with him having this opt-out, that he could use it as a little bit of a fallback plan to, like, let's say he doesn't have to really worry so much this year, because even if, things don't go well, he still does have a contract for next season. So, like, it's not this year is the be-all, end-all like the way it was last year. And honestly, it might be better for Pete to opt in, because then he doesn't have to potentially compete with Vlad on the free agent market. Because let's say that Pete opts in, Vlad gets signed, then Pete goes free agency the next year, and then he could be the top first baseman available. Instead of you battling with Vlad, you have Josh Naylor available. So I feel like for Pete's sake, there definitely is another way that he could still be more productive and not have to put as much pressure on himself. So I really am hoping that having like that second year available to him, whether he chooses to opt in or not, should help him out altogether. Instead of the Mets just giving him like 1 year 30 and that's it, the fact that there still is that potential chance of a second year if he does have another season where he's not quite his caliber player, because it wasn't just this season. I mean, we saw his struggles, but still 2023 was not as good as 2022. So if you continue to see him not being able to be close to that number, that threshold, then again, it might make more sense for him to opt in. So it is going to be very interesting to see what happens on both sides. And we'll get to our lineup configuration later on, but you would also think that like having someone the caliber of Juan Soto should make him better. I mean, it really should.
It should.
He's going to have a lot of opportunities. I mean, he really is. You have a guy that is like historic when it comes to getting on base at the top of that lineup. You have MVP caliber player Lindor at the top of that lineup. So he's going to have a lot of opportunities. So if he wants to make, the big payday, I mean, this is the kind of team that he could do it with.
Yeah. I feel like right now, if you look at it from both angles and both sides, because both sides in these negotiations seem to be far apart for quite some time, but I think that it really just shows, the Mets right now and Pete Alonso, both sides kind of get a second chance at life right here. And I think that that's kind of the view that I give to it, as to where Pete Alonso, even if it turns out to be a year like 2024 was for him, he still obviously has that pillow of a contract as to where he doesn't have to compete with, the Vladimir Guerrero Jr., where, he's going to get term and Pete probably won't because he's going to be 31 years old. The Mets, on the other hand, the lineup gets deeper. They can build this around instead of a like 2-man nucleus, it can make it a little bit more of, with this power protection, like a 4-man nucleus, if you want to include somebody like Vientos in there, and you talk about even if Brandon Nimmo were to able to bounce back and be able to be healthy. But when it comes to the overall look of the lineup, it definitely got better. I said it from the very, very beginning, and I feel like it's become a little misconstrued from the way that we've talked about these negotiations, and I understand that it sounds like it. I'd say that, the way that we have kind of talked about it, it really just came from a very exhausting point. It really did not really come from, we just are not fans of Pete. Listen, I don't know what angle Andrew was coming from. He's not here to talk of what angle he was coming from. He's just, he'll say whatever he wants, and hopefully he doesn't get us canceled. But, when it comes to the look of the overall lineup here, I said it from the very beginning. I would welcome Pete back with open arms, but it's going to have to be on the Mets' terms. And it seemed like the Mets, they gave in a little bit. They definitely, brought in the lining a little bit. And I think that there is a look of the AAV, that it seemed like there was some common ground there, but the overall years, it seemed like Alonso really had to come down on them. And the Mets kind of sweetened it a little bit with the high AAV deal. Now, I was not expecting $27 million to be the luxury tax hit if they were to bring him back. I was expecting like $24 million, $23 million. So it definitely looks a little bit more overwhelming compared to what I was expecting. In overall AAV, considering, age as a non-factor, because of course age is the main reason as to why you get these long-term deals. And that's the main reason as to why there was such a hesitant on Pete Alonso. I think it's really, a good deal from both sides right now. And, some way they were going to have to overpay. And I feel like at one point they were going to come together at one way. Just because of how this market is looked at. It really wasn't anything of he wanted to be a Met or he wanted to stay here or what he wanted to, we could hear that all we want. I feel like if he desperately wanted to be a Met, it would have gotten done a lot quicker than it did. I don't really care if he wanted to be a Met or not, personally. I just want to see the team play. I just wanted it over. Like, that was it. That was all I wanted. My goal was I wanted this thing over before spring training started, even pitchers and catchers started, and it was over. That was it. That was all I wanted. Didn't really care how it ended. Didn't care where he went. I just wanted the thing over. And luckily, the Mets do get the advantage in this point as to where they can re-sign him. He doesn't go to the Blue Jays or the Angels. I don't have to see that. That was the biggest win of this one. I don't have to see Brett Beatty start for the New York Mets on opening day unless something traumatic happens during spring training. Who knows? I'm just saying, but unless something traumatic happens, Vientos will be at third. Pete Alonso will be at first. And as for Mark Vientos, I think this is really good for him, and we could talk about him for a little bit of a second. He doesn't have to learn a new position. He does not need to put his mind onto that. Third base, he has played that regularly in the minor leagues and the major leagues. He got extended time there in 2024. I've talked about, the want of Vientos to play a position. He's going to be 25 years old next year, a 25-year-old DH. When he has the ability to give you positional flexibility, there is absolutely no reason as to why he should be. Now, obviously, the DHs we have in place as of right now, I think I'm willing to, start off with a foundation of Mark Vientos, who does have a strong arm. A strong arm is needed at third base. And I think that this will be a lot better for him because, again, power, counteracting power, someone's going to get a pitch that they like. I mean, there's only three bases that can be occupied before you give up runs. So someone is going to get pitches that they like to hit if you're talking about this top five from this lineup. And we all know that top five, when they get that pitch, they can do some serious damage. We saw Mark Vientos do that. We'll see if he can consistently do that. But, I mean, Frank, I think that this is just really, really easy to say that this lineup got better, it got deeper, and it also got a little bit more, I guess, a little bit more safer for how you kind of counteract things with other pieces in this lineup, getting pitches to hit, as opposed to chasing the breaking ball in the other part of the batter's box, which we talked about so much last year being a hitting problem. But now you're going to have guys that maybe they don't offer at it, or maybe guys that protect the guys that offer at it.
Yeah, I think to your last point, when it comes to chasing, I mean, like we said, it was a lot of the right-handed hitters that were struggling with that pitch in particular. We're talking about like where they're chasing on that outside part of the plate. Well, now it's like, okay, well, you add somebody in Juan Soto who, 98th percentile in chase rate and is a left-handed hitter. So he is the exact equalizer to that problem. Like if you had to pick any player in Major League Baseball and say, okay, well, how could we change our team so we have a player that doesn't struggle with this? Juan Soto is literally the guy. So they added him. JD Martinez was one of the biggest culprits with something like that.
Yes.
Okay, we take him out and replace him with another left-handed hitter in Jesse Winker. So automatically, just by the guys they have on the roster, they have made a big improvement there. So we'll see how it ends up, though, because I feel like one of the big things to keep in mind with Vientos is that his role in the offense changed as the season progressed, and he had that great postseason, and he did it in that number 2 spot. And we'll get to our lineup configuration in a little bit, but I don't anticipate him batting second based off some of the guys they added. So it's like now that you have someone who was your second best hitter potentially batting as low as 5th, that shows you like how much your lineup has improved and like the different things you could do with this lineup. It has a lot more flexibility to where the way I look at it is you could play the hot hand. I mean, let's say that Pete actually does go on a big run. You could put him in the top 3. If Nimmo gets red hot like he was the first half, he could bat third. If Vientos hitting like he was in the playoffs, you can move him up. So like it could always be something where it's like I always say your best players get the most at bats. It could be something that like you have a lot of different guys that could get on a roll and really change the way your team is performing. So just having more options is nice. And then when it comes to like the position that he's playing, in a full 162, he's hitting 30 home runs. And a lot of third basemen don't do that. So, I mean, that is a luxury to have where it's like you have somebody who's DH caliber at third base. So that is, and if anything, it's actually a luxury a little bit. Like range is not great, but it doesn't totally kill you. And it helps you have Lindor next to you on that left side of the infield. So he's someone that, he's still really young. That was his first like full season. So there still is a lot more he could learn. Could there be a sophomore slump? Sure. But
do we
like
out?
I said, no, I'm in right now. Am I in? Are we there?
All right, we're good. We should be good. I don't know. Some spiked. I don't know. You can continue.
All right. I was going to say, yes, Vientos could have a sophomore slump, but overall, like, again, with the addition of Juan Soto, he's going to have more opportunities, too, with men on base. So it's just that, like, adding Juan Soto makes everybody better, and then bringing back P. Alonso also makes everybody better. So, again, I'm just kind of very interested to see how it looks when it all comes together.
We'll see how they do construct this thing. Because we've had different lineup configurations forever. I'm hoping that we can solidify this in one way as to where we kind of mix and match things and just kind of stick with something, because I do feel like with how pitchers do throw and how they kind of, go after chases as much as they do, and, the way pitching is these days, I do think that batters, a batting order is very, very important in that way as to what reps you get and the amount of reps you get against a certain pitcher, but also for the protection for the next guy as to where, if they don't want to pitch to him, there's somebody else there that can do some damage in the zone. And that's the main reason as to why I'm not the biggest fan of some of the guys in this lineup. But they can be a little bit covered now with it being about more 5-man deep of possibly 25 to 30 home run threats from this top 5. But we will see what happens with this overall lineup. We will get into our preferred lineups now with Pete Alonso back into the mix. Maybe it does change somewhat. If they were to have any sort of struggles, maybe there's something that we have been seeing a lot in spring training, and hopefully it doesn't carry on to, the next part of the regular season. But obviously they're going to be testing a few things out. I think we know at this point what the top 2 is going to be. And I think that when we, talk about the lineup construction, there are some pieces that I feel like are kind of solidified into the lineup right now, whether we like it or not. Obviously, there is a preference of who I would prefer to have playing, and we will talk about, the entirety of Luisangel Acuna, where he does fit into this. But I do want to get into our preferred lineups with Pete Alonso back into the mix. And I feel like we have kind of come from a more similar range. Ours are pretty similar. Obviously, it's very easy to set these things up, especially when you have guys like Lindor and Soto at the top there, and kind of, mix and matching things like that. But I think from, whatever perspective that we have them from, I think that the lineup definitely can be installed in a way that you have threats throughout, at minimum, the first and the second inning. And that's something that we have not really been able to say recently, as for hot streaks and cold streaks and things like that with an established bat such as Juan Soto there. So I will pop up our preferred lineups. Frank, I'll let you go first as to, your process of thinking, kind of installing Pete Alonso into this lineup. I think we pretty much have like the exact same here, except a little bit of a switch in Alonso and Nimmo. But I do want to know the thought process here. Guys, let us know which lineup you do like better at this current moment going into opening day. But with the return of Pete Alonso, I mean, do you have like a certain thought process of how you would put things together, balancing the lineup out? It feels like we're on pretty much the same page at this current moment. But, we'll see how guys go into the formula here. So let's say right now we're having this in mind with facing a right-handed starter, because there is something that has to say with that, of course, with Jesse Winker being here, mainly hitting right-handed pitching. But Frank, you can do a little bit of a rundown of your preferred lineup as of right now.
Yeah, I mean, I went with the righty-lefty thing. I feel like the guy who really, it was toughest to find a spot for him is Nimmo. We both feel that Brandon Nimmo, his best spot is leading off, but with what happened last year with Lindor, you cannot take him at that leadoff spot. Like, it Absolutely is just not an option. He was, like we said, once he switched to that leadoff spot, he was MVP caliber. So I don't want to do that. And then for Pete, we've talked about the success that he's had in that 2-hole before. So, like a thought was, maybe you could go something like Lindor, Alonso, Soto. Like that would have been interesting. But I feel like they just paid so much for Soto that he has to bat second. So like you paid him so much that he needs to get a lot of ABs. And then, when it came to Alonso, it's like I just wasn't sure how I felt about there's a few things that I had in mind here. So if you put Nimmo third, what I didn't like was having Alonso and Vientos back to back. I just feel like they have too much similarities, like we were talking about with that chasing and like those pitches on the outside corner. So I felt like if you had something where it's like you have a hitter that like is a little more balanced than Juan Soto, a little more disciplined, then you have Pete who's more aggressive, then Nimmo who's more conservative, and then you have Vientos who's like more aggressive when it comes to swinging the bat and just kind of alternating that back and forth. Then with Winker, I just felt like it would make things a little tougher for a pitcher. And also just like when you're coming into a game, it's like, oh, well, they stacked the left-handers. Let me go to my lefty now. I just feel like it's very hard. We have like each hitter is like a little different as far as like they alternating their play style. And then like same thing goes like with McNeil and series. So I just feel like this kind of lineup that I put together, I just feel like it makes it a little tougher for pitchers where they have that situation we've seen the Mets have like the bases loaded and nobody out and they only get like one run out of it because everyone strikes out. I just feel like when you balance it like this and you have these contact hitters and these power hitters and these on base guys in between the power hitters, I feel like it's just make for not like getting stuck and just like being in a rut like we've seen them before.
Yeah, I mean, I really do value like the protection of which opportunities you get for overall damage. And I feel like as for who gets the most amount of plate appearances, obviously we look at it from the top part of this lineup. I feel like when you look at the overall of who you want as a overall guy to put in there to get the most situational opportunities, yes, there is Francisco Lindor, who was big for us down the stretch. Juan Soto, we already know what he is capable of. He will 100% be a huge contributor in this lineup, and I don't see him slowing down anytime soon in his career, obviously him being 26 years old. But Brandon Nimmo is the best situational hitter on this team and was last year in 2024, even though he was not great. He definitely came through when you really needed him in those high leverage situations. Didn't he lead the team in runs batted in? I'm pretty sure for like the whole year or
he
for
did.
quite a while.
I feel like Lindor eventually probably gave him a little bit of a run there, but Nimmo, I mean, he was just so strong in the first half that second half really kind of messed up what he was off to a phenomenal start. I mean, we had said that Nimmo should have been the all-star over Alonso, and Lindor finished with one more RBI than Nimmo did last year.
Okay. So, again, and we all know that Francisco Lindor was struggling towards a decent part of that first half as well. So, obviously, he got on that incredible tear, helped us get to the postseason. The thing is that when I look at my lineup, of course, yes, there is the old thought of your best hit, or not the old thought, or the thought as of right now, your best hitter is in the 2 spot, which means that they're pretty much in the middle of everything. They get possibly the most plate appearances, of course, with your leadoff hitter being able to be a guy who can work counts. We know that Francisco Lindor, being the leadoff hitter that he was able to be play a little bit more of a balanced game. You know, he was not in the center of everything, but then he brought himself into the center by not being in the center, if that makes sense. And as for with Juan Soto, it's again, Francisco Lindor, from what you're paying for him and what you need him to be, he was the best from the leadoff spot. Juan Soto, best hitter in the lineup by far. There's no doubt about it. As for 3, I see this as the most balanced hitter on the team. Whether you're talking about this from overall platoons of a guy who can hit left-handed pitching and right-handed pitching, we know that Brandon Nimmo has been good from both of those platoons. Whether you're talking about it from last year where he struggled a little bit, but it seems like he really, at any opportunity, could break through. We saw that the power recently has definitely, climbed through. Obviously, Brandon Nimmo coming off of a struggling end to the season is probably the main reason as to why Mets fans don't want to see him in that 3 spot. But overall, when it comes to situationally overall balance of what he can provide, I believe that Brandon Nimmo is the perfect 3-hole hitter at this current moment. And then also I have a little bit more of that PTSD of Pete Alonso, kind of lowering him to that cleanup lineup, as I feel like he's just become a little bit more of a cleanup hitter recently. I understand that he was not great with men on base, of course, but I just think that right now it's just become pretty much strictly power with him, and maybe there's a way that he heats up and there's a little bit more of an approach there, but I do want to see his discipline or his lack thereof of discipline kind of be protected in this way. But I also want to protect Mark Vientos from a sophomore slump as best as I can. And I have to put Mark Vientos afterwards because I do want to put him in there, but I don't want to put the full-on year that he had onto center stage because of the adjustments that pitchers do make to him. And maybe he does make adjustments fine and you can move him up in the lineup, but I also want to kind of protect him, his overall discipline with his chasing, as to where he likes to swing a lot with, of course, somebody like Jesse Winker, of course, which I think is a really, really good way to protect that type of ability. We've talked about power protection before, of protecting Pete, protecting this guy, protecting that way. I think that it also does go both ways with guys who, again, like you said as well, guys who chase, guys who have these types of tendencies to not give us competitive ABs sometimes. And I won't, appoint it to who possibly could be the problem in that way to a certain extent. But again, even though Jeff McNeil has not been fantastic, and I do not want Jeff McNeil in this opening day lineup, I think that, when it comes to Pete Alonso or Mark Vientos, guys ahead of him, I feel like someone's going to have to pitch to someone when it comes to Pete Alonso and Vientos, and I understand the lefty-righty type of thing, and I kind of wanted to mix that in because, again, if we were just talking about pure power, Francisco Alvarez probably would be moved up to 6th in this regard. And then, you have Winker in the bottom part of the order, and then probably, if you're just going strict power of the most bases that you can accumulate, Jose Siri would be batting 8th, and then you have Jeff McNeil at 9th, who is obviously the worst power hitter in this entire lineup. So, again, constructing this in this way, I feel like the best way to talk about a fluent offense and not a streaky offense, for me, I want to protect the flaws with the non-flaws of the next guy. Like, that's my whole thought of it, and I feel like the Mets that have a little bit deeper of a lineup right now, if all goes well, again, and there are other options if they have a struggling part in this lineup, looking at you, Jeff McNeil, looking at you, Jose Siri as a possibility, who knows? But I really think that it can definitely be protected one by one of these types of weaknesses to kind of maximize this overall as a team. And that's kind of how I'm looking at it from the overall protection. And then also you have a little bit more of a balance of left-handed hitters here. And, you also can hopefully limit a little bit more of the opportunities to chase pitches in the other batter's box, specifically from secondary stuff and those sliders that killed us. I don't know if that makes sense, Frank, but I think that, we're pretty much coming up from the same angle. Some people are saying they agree with me. Some people are saying they agree with you. It's not that big of a change. I just don't want to see Brandon Nimmo as the cleanup hitter just because he was the RBI leader for quite a while. I kind of see the third hitter as more of the more balanced hitter that can kind of, maneuver things. I think Pete Alonso at this current moment, he's not the best hitter in the lineup. Juan Soto is. You can argue, in my opinion, overall balance. There's Brandon Nimmo there. Francisco Lindor, of course, in the leadoff spot. So I would say that Pete Alonso right now, at the trajectory that we're going, cleanup's probably the best position for him. I don't know if that's what you believe. I just don't see Brandon Nimmo as a guy to provide that type of cleanup type of tendencies. I just see him more as the balance guy of, you need this, let's do this. And I can do this. I can do this in any single situation, even though he struggled. But we'll get to the poll here. But Frank, I don't know if there's anything else that you want to add on your preferred lineup here. Because, again, I'm not opposed to it. And I'm okay with splitting the lefty-righty if you want to do something like that. But I think that Brandon Nimmo has shown that he's the most balanced hitter in this lineup. And when he's right, they should give him an overall chance to do that. And Pete Alonso just seems like more of a cleanup hitter as time goes by. Going into his 30s, I think it just profiles better that way. Maybe he bounced back, who knows? But that's kind of my thought on this overall lineup. I just think Nimmo is just better situationally.
Yeah, I mean, I just have Nimmo where he is because of the fit of who's around him. So, I mean, again, to go back to Vientos, I mean, when you're talking about a strikeout percentage in the 8th percentile, I mean, that's not ideal right after Pete Alonso. I mean, Nimmo, he struck out more than usual, but still, he's someone that he doesn't chase, and he still draws a lot of walks. So I just felt like Alonso and Vientos, it just would have been too much when it came to the strikeouts. So, I mean, I just thought that it was a bit risky to have those two guys back-to-back when I know that Soto's getting on a lot, Lindor's on a lot. And then if you had Nimmo from, I just know like they're going to have opportunities, so I can't have guys striking out when there's men on base. So I feel like, you know, with, let's say Lindor's on, Soto's on, if Alonso messes up, okay, well, at least Nimmo's after him. And like you said, he was the Mets' best guy running scoring position. Batted, I was looking at it. It was just, I mean, some absolutely really good numbers. 319 with runners in scoring position, 299 with men on. So, I mean, OPS over 1,000 runners in scoring position. And that was with him batting like under 200 in the entire second half just in general. So he was insane with men on base. So I feel like in a cleanup spot, he's still going to have a lot of opportunities because he's still going to be batting like shortly after Lindor and Soto. So I feel like no matter what, Nimmo is still going to get plenty of opportunities to drive in runs. And again, just how he fits with how the kind of player Alonso is, with the kind of player Vientos is, I feel like just sandwiching him right in between them, I feel like was just the best overall fit for who's around him.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think that there's two different angles here of like protecting this in some way. I think that I've kind of soured off of the Pete Alonso at the 2-hole, obviously, because we kind of viewed him as the best hitter on this team or the most damage, fiend part of this team. Right now, that's not really the case, and it's kind of just more of this complimentary cleanup hitter type of guy that he is. And I feel like that's just the best way for him to be suited in that way. But I understand the back-to-back chasing that you could get from a guy like Mark Vientos and Pete Alonso in that way. But again, if it's 2 outs types of things, it's all really just the overall situational hitting that needs to get better and was streaky last year. So hopefully the deepness of this lineup can be, constructed in that way. I really do more prefer protecting Vientos's flaws as compared to Pete Alonso's flaws, only because you have ways to set things up to the cleanup position with somebody like Pete Alonso, who we've seen drive in runs before. And also, if we were to get somewhat of production close to 2022 production, no matter what, no matter where he is batting, he's going to have to lay off that outside slider because he had over 200 swings at a down and away pitch. Like, he was an absolute liability in that way. So I'm not saying that it's going to completely go away. Obviously, he's older. There's still the concerns. He wasn't great last year, and that was the main reason as to why his market took so long and why it dipped. But either way, no matter what, whether there's somebody batting behind him, I feel like it's better just to have power protection for Alonso than situational protection, because Pete Alonso is going to have to be in those situations, whether Soto and Lindor or Nimmo is hot or not. They're going to have to rely on him as a guy to give you the secondary source, of course, of whether it is overall situational guys, whether you're talking about it from comparison to Nimmo or Soto. Again, you're going to need Pete Alonso in that certain cleanup position. I see the cleanup position now, with how this roster now is with Juan Soto here, the cleanup position more, I feel like, is just a guy who's looking to mash. And that's really the Pete Alonso type of MO here. But again, the approach is going to have to change no matter what happens. I'd rather have the veteran in Pete Alonso try to figure it out than the youngster in Mark Vientos that pitchers are already making adjustments to after the year that he just had, first full season that he just had. I'm trying to prevent a sophomore slump as best as I can and not shedding a light on Mark Vientos last year, our second best hitter. Let's put him in the 3-hole. Let's put him in the 4-hole. You know, like I don't want to put him in that spotlight because I want to see him sustain into the hitter that we know that he can be after what he showed us last year. We've seen guys flip-flop from years to years. We've seen it happen before. So I'm not trying to put it on full blast of Mark Vientos because we know the bat is there. But I don't want to have Mark Vientos in those certain situations where we get a slump because his chasing tendencies are still very, very high. And they were last year. There's tons of swing and miss there. But we all know that if he gets those pitches, he's going to make some really loud contact no matter what.
Yeah, I mean, you really want, like I said, it's important for the player development just to see what happens. But I think overall, like we said, it is a fluid situation where it's like guys could be moved around as needed. Like if Nemo struggles again, like he could be lowered, and if Alvarez gets it going, he could be, like you said, he could be moved up, or like anyone besides Lindor and Soto could basically be moved. I mean, if you wanted to do something like, you could do like Lindor, Nemo, Soto. Like you could try something like that too. Yeah. Like put Nemo back in the top half. Let him, because I feel like Nemo, like he's still trying to decide where he's at. Because like he was a leadoff hitter for so many years. Now you moved him to the middle of the order, and he's like trying to become a power hitter, but he couldn't really sustain it. So I feel like he's kind of in a tough spot right now too. So maybe it'd be best to kind of move him back to like a table setter role, like where he's accustomed to.
Maybe.
So I mean that's something for them to consider as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, personally, the overall balance of Brandon Nimmo, like I have said, with his overall contributes to the lineup, and that's what I really, really liked. I look at it more of what we saw in 2023, of course, with the career high in home runs, from the leadoff spot, of course, which it would be a little bit different. But I feel like it just gets stabilized better with him batting behind Soto as to where, he can just do his thing no matter what. And maybe there is a way as to where they set up Pete Alonso a little bit better. Maybe we do see more stolen bases from Brandon Nimmo. If that foot heals, I don't think we're going to get it. But we got 15 last year from him with a foot injury for half of the year. So I don't know how many of those stolen bases were in the second half. There probably weren't many because he was really grimacing and grimacing.
Yeah, I mean, he had said that his injury did not happen until later in the season. He was actually 50-50. Yeah. So it was 8 stolen bases the first half, 7 in the second half.
Okay. Interesting. So we'll see.
And even like we talked about, I mean, the RBIs, though, I mean, that's really where we see the difference. I mean, he had 63 in the first half compared to 27 in the second half. So that was quite a big disparity there.
Yeah, I think recently, as the time has gone on, the trajectory of things, Brandon Nimmo has hit the ball harder than Pete Alonso at 50th percentile recently. So again, I feel like there is power there, but there's also contact. Like, again, he can add the power as compared to his hit tool overall with Brandon Nimmo because he's just the most balanced hitter in this lineup. And that's where I feel like this is the best way to put in this situation of the 3-hole, because usually the 2-hole and 3-hole hitters are the guys that get the most of these high leverage situations. I don't know if this is just more of me just seeing PTSD from what Pete Alonso was able to do. And even though he has that pillow as to where there's not much pressure on him and he gets a second chance of life, like I said, I feel like there is a way as to where Pete Alonso just right now, it's a comfortable position for him to produce the best from the cleanup spot with Juan Soto here being the overall impact bat that he is. Now, if we were talking about another type of bat that's here, like let's say Anthony Santander was here, or let's say they signed Jorge Soler or something like that, probably would be a different type of thought. But when it comes to Juan Soto, he's so freaking good that he can stabilize so many different things. And I feel like if you were to split up somebody like Alonso and Soto, who are definitely different types of hitters, and you balance Brandon Nimmo in the middle of it, I think that there's definitely a feel as to where you can have a little bit more consistent offense, deepens the lineup a little bit more. And you also, in between deepening the lineup, you don't have complete non-competitive hitters. Now, the bottom part of the lineup is a wait and see. Who knows what's going to happen? They do have the possible reinforcements if that does happen. We already know that there's someone we will talk about. Let's say if Jeff McNeil struggles, there probably will be some playing time there for somebody like Luisangel Acuna. We've talked about, Jose Siri and Tyrone Taylor as the possible platoon. You can bring it into lefty and righty platoon, or try to get more playing time out of somebody like Drew Gilbert. It all is very, very flexible in that way from the bottom part of the order. And then it's also flexible from the top because you have a lot of competitive hitters, which is really, really good and something we haven't seen for a long, long time for the Mets. I think that, was 06 probably the deepest lineup compared to this one? I'd say that going forward...
It's different because there was also the pitcher hitting back then in 2006.
There was.
So, I mean, automatically, you already have a bit of an advantage to how you can construct lineups. I will say that, on paper, 06 is better, but, I mean, the team has potential. Like, if Alvarez is anywhere close to his best version, and then the real big one is, if McNeil is anywhere close to what he's capable of, I mean, this lineup could become very, very good, but that's just a matter of it's been a while now, so we'll see. I mean, there's no guarantees there, so it's going to be kind of a wait and see. And then with Siri, I mean, he's just very hit or miss. I mean, he's kind of an all-or-nothing player, so, the games where Siri hits home runs are games the Mets will probably do really well, but the games where he strikes out a few times, those games can be a little tougher, so I think that's going to be interesting. Even this Marte thing, it doesn't help because, I mean, one of the things you consider is okay, well, maybe Marte pinch hits for Siri later in the game, but then it's you bring Taylor in, but what's Marte really going to be providing at that point? We don't know. We'll see if that's something they get done at some point, but even something maybe Acuna pinch hits for him or one of these guys just off the bench as another option. We'll see what happens. I mean, you could also do something let's say you started against a lefty, so you had Marte starting Winker off the bench late in the game. Winker pinch hits for Siri, and then Taylor comes in as the defensive replacement. So, you can have those opportunities where 1 through 9 it'll look a little stronger. But I mean, just overall, just going based off what we project, what we think is going to happen, I wouldn't say it's quite as good, but I mean, it does have potential.
Yeah, I feel like as for the
top half is better though, because I mean, MLB Network
is the top.
MLB Network had they were ranking the top 3s of orders. They actually had P. Alonso in the top 3 as far as the way it's constructed. They ranked it number 2 behind the Dodgers of all MVPs, which makes sense. But when you look at it and you look at the combination of Lindor, Soto, Alonso, it stacks up pretty well with anybody. So I mean, I'll say top half they are stronger. But I think that bottom half, like we said, with McNeil and Siri and then Alvarez, we're not quite sure what's going to happen there. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, hopefully Alvarez is a lot healthier than he was last year. Thumb gripping the bat also maybe had something to do with him catching behind the plate as well.
New swing.
New swing as well. Some people are saying it looks like Miguel Cabrera. I'm not there yet. It's much more. It's much more compact. I mean, he did have a long swing, led to a lot of swing and miss. I feel like with him, he's one of those guys. I talked about Pete before, but he has a lot of natural power. So if he's just making more contact, naturally he should be able to have power regardless. So I mean, if he's able to just get bat to ball much better now, he could be a better player. Yeah, I mean, there's other the power is definitely not a concern that I have with Francisco Alvarez. I'd say that some other hitting tools are a deep concern of consistency, which I feel like we all know that he does need to, develop in some way. And he's still young. We'll see what happens there. We'll see what happens for any of the other moves that happen. Carlos Ortiz saying bat McNeil 9th. Listen, I'm not a big fan of McNeil. I think we all know I'm not. I really want him not to be a part of this team, but at this point, I've pretty much, I've pretty much just admitted that at this point he's gonna be here. So it's not like he's just gonna be magically gone, because I don't think anybody wants to take him or his salary whatsoever. So he's gonna be here. Will I still criticize him? Probably will. But I think that right now, when it comes to McNeil, compared to somebody like Jose Siri, who pretty much will swing at anything. And listen, the discipline of McNeil has declined. It has. And he's had more chasing. He's had more or less non-competitive ABs after, what he had in the first half last year. But then you get to a whole other level with Jose Siri where he will basically swing at pretty much everything. I'm not saying this is not the extreme, ridiculous level of Javi Baez where it's like you're not going to get anything from him. It's pretty damn close. It is pretty damn close because, again, the amount of contact that he makes is the concern. The quality of contact that he does make, it's loud. It's loud when he does get those pitches to hit. Hopefully he does get those pitches to hit with the top of the order coming up behind him. I feel like that's just the best way to protect his flaws in that way. So I probably would put McNeil 8th. I obviously am not going to, root in that way to say like, oh, McNeil's got a bad 8th because he's the better hitter. It's just because Jose Siri will swing at possibly anything that goes his way, and he's here for defense. So again,
the bigger issue with Siri is that yes, he swings a lot, but the bigger problem is how much he whiffs. I mean, we're talking about first percentile whiff and 12% chase. McNeil 32% chase, but 87% whiff. So it's like McNeil is chasing a lot, but he doesn't whiff. But Siri, that's what's that he's swinging and he's coming up with nothing but air. That's a big issue. So it's like if you're going to chase, at least make contact. He's not doing either. So it can be some rough ABs for sure.
Yeah, and Siri's a fun player. He always is a fun player. He's an exciting player. I'm hoping that, again, those flaws do get protected in this way of him batting 9th. But, we'll see how they kind of maneuver things in that way. And then also you have the righty-lefty, too, that you can talk about if you want to balance that out. Splits it up, has McNeil batting 8th, and then, you have somebody like Siri batting 9th who, again, flaws need to be protected in that way. So you just never know how they're going to do things like that, but I can almost guarantee that Siri is most likely going to be batting 9th if he does start. I really have a strong inkling that is going to end up happening because, again, there is some tendencies from this guy where it is rough. It is a very, very rough approach that you get from him, and maybe there's things that get ironed out in this way. But as for a guy of just strictly contact, and again, I'm not someone to toot the horn of Jeff McNeil. I'm the complete opposite of that. If you're talking about somebody who just strictly put the ball in play situationally, I'm probably taking McNeil over somebody like Siri who just swings at anything that he sees in the vicinity of the batter's box. So you just never know. Ibby makes a really good point as well, not about the lineup, but about the stream. There's 46 in here for our YouTube stream. For those of you in Twitter, you can come over here to our YouTube channel and talk to us. Best way to communicate with us because, of course, Twitter comments get a little bit mixed in and some of them don't come through. So, 22 likes. Let's get this thing up. Support the channel. Thank you guys so much for the support recently. We've had some numbers come up, so we really appreciate that in that way. Now, obviously, the way that things complement each other in that lineup is something that I feel like is a very important thing that they do need to find a way because of how inconsistent the offense was last year. But when it comes to, certain guys on this team, I do want to talk about Luisangel Acuna's role in 2025 because I feel like we've had a lot of questions in this way with the second base role of everything as to where, is Luisangel Acuna somebody that you see as someone who makes the opening day roster? I'm seeing it as a very hard hitting debate in this way because, yes, Luisangel Acuna, I believe, when it comes to opening day, it comes to a point where I'm like, okay, Luisangel Acuna has earned the right to be on the opening day roster after what he has shown, and I don't think that there is going to be tools that come in over him as compared to what he provides for a team. Then there's another image here, and I don't know if this is something that you kind of think about, Frank, as well. If with the overall load of expectation or just load of, contract or whatever. To me, and I hate saying this to the kid, but it's kind of just the hand that we're dealt right now. If Jeff McNeil is on the opening day roster, I don't think Luisangel Acuna should be. And that's just my thought of how the process goes. The problem is that you probably have a bench that's not the best. The problem that I have with that is if a young player such as Luisangel Acuna is up here, he needs to play every day, whether it is in the majors or whether it is in AAA. Whether people believe that he is a utility man in the future, the only way for him to develop is for him to play every day, not sit behind Jeff McNeil on the bench. Because personally, I think he's just a second baseman shortstop. We already know that, Lindor recently has showed no signs of slowing down, has a very high pain tolerance for pretty much any injury at this point after what we saw him with the back towards the end of the season. The problem is that I need to see a young kid play every day for the overall of his, for the overall of his game to develop. And you're not going to get that with Jeff McNeil being here. And I've talked about it before as to with Jose Iglesias of bringing him back. The only best way to bring him back, because he could be a part-time player. We've seen him succeed. He's a veteran. His game is completely developed. Luisangel Acuna would have to be the starting second baseman if you're going to give a major league contract to somebody like Jose Iglesias, which I don't think they want to completely bank on, and that's probably the main reason as to why the formula stays with Jeff McNeil being here. Also the fact that I don't think anybody wants him. But I do not want to see Luisangel Acuna sitting behind Jeff McNeil. I don't want to hear any platoon crap. I don't want to hear he can be the backup shortstop, because Luis Guillorme was doing that as the backup shortstop, and he did not, his tools don't give an impact to a major league roster as compared to somebody like Luisangel Acuna's could. So again, if Jeff McNeil is here, which I have accepted that he will be, Luisangel Acuna should be starting in AAA, because I just don't want to see him being a part-time player. That's not fair to him. That's not fair to his development as a young player. And, if they want to bring in Jose Iglesias, that brings in Nick Madrigal to the equation, that's fine. I care a little bit more about the young player and his development, and I don't want to screw that up in that way of holding guys hostage on the bench, because they need to be playing every day to develop and finish their development as a major league player. And that's what I think needs to happen with Luisangel Acuna.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing that Acuna really has is that sprint speed in the 90th percentile. So, I mean, there's another tool on your bench to have to dispose at any point where, that's something you could do. It is pretty unfortunate that Acuna does not play third and McNeil does not play third base as good as he used to. So it's not even something you could put him as like defensive replacement to take Vientos out of the game, which is something they were doing with Iglesias. Now maybe they do that with Madrigal since he can play third and it's like he comes in and substitutes. But I think it does stink when you look at this roster and you say, okay, well, like, who are your best 26 players? And Acuna is definitely one of the Mets' 26 best players. But
yeah, that's the
it's
problem.
like it's more so like what is the best fit and development, then that's the case. Like you said, if he wasn't such a young player who still is developing, then sure, he could be a nice guy to have to start every now and then. But because he still is so young, we saw like his first 14 games of his major league career at the end of the season, like he still just has like so many more reps he needs to get that we'll see what happens. And I think it's one thing when it's like you say like, okay, well, what's the opening day lineup? Like who's going to be at second base? Who's going to be on the bench? That's one thing. But then if you ask me, okay, well, who's going to be in the lineup on the last day of the season? Who's going to be in the lineup when the playoffs start? It may not be the same lineup that you see. And I think that's the other big point is that, like, listen, I think, in my opinion, I think that McNeil should have a shorter leash than usual. If he gets off to a slow start and Acuna is tearing it up, make the switch. I mean, what's the point? Why are we wasting our time if it's clear that he is the better player? And this year, if everybody's healthy, Jet Williams is also going to be competing. And whether you have your criticisms of him, listen, we had the same criticisms of Acuna.
No, he's going to get his chance too. Oh, yeah.
He's going to have a chance too. So McNeil's going to have two young guys breathing down his neck, maybe outplaying him. And then that gets into an interesting thing too. It's like, okay, well, let's say Jet and Acuna are playing well, but then who do you decide? I mean, it's like, then does Jet get a chance over Acuna? And it's like he's still in the minors. So, I mean, that's something they have to figure out. It's like they could experiment with one of them in center field, which they've tried a little bit. We're not fans of it, but listen, you want to talk about like more offense in general? Well, what if you replace that combination of McNeil and Siri with Acuna and Williams? I mean, now you have much more offense. You have a lot of speed. You could be swiping bags all over the place. Like, you could do some different things. Very right-handed heavy, but listen, it's younger, it's faster, and it's a different look than what we've seen in the past.
Yeah, and then you also bring in the other part of the formula, too, which is a little bit farther down the line, obviously, with health reasons, but you also have Ronnie Mauricio in that mix as well. So, again, like I'm saying, you have so many of these young guys that they cannot be on the bench, and they're going to have to mix and match them in that way with the surplus that they have, and they're going to have to acclimate them some way on the roster. And if you are going to acclimate Luisangel Acuna, Jeff McNeil can't be here. It literally just can't. But again, here's the reality of the situation, because we're always going to go into the reality of the situation. Jeff McNeil shouldn't be here, and to be honest, he would be a free agent. Jeff McNeil, completely aside, in my opinions about him, that really doesn't have anything to do with this type of conversation. It's more of just the development of a young player that you cannot stunt in that way because, oh, well, he's part of this organization. He's a top prospect. He's our best of 26 because he 100% is. And that's one of the main reasons as to why I see guys like McNeil and also guys like Starling Marte clogging up the works of this team being better than it possibly could. I think that with young guys, when it comes to young players, you can't just fill them in on the bench. You can't do that. Unless they have earned the reason to be on the bench, such as somebody like Brett Beatty, who right now, bench, that's the best. He's not a starting caliber MLB player. But when it comes to what these guys have provided and what they have earned, Luisangel Acuna, no matter what, if it's in the majors or in AAA, he deserves to play every day. And I personally think it's more of just the second base conversation, whether you're talking about it from shortstop. If Lindor has an injury going into his 30s, who knows? But it doesn't seem like he's showing any signs of slowing down with his health. He's been an Iron Man pretty much like for his entire Mets tenure. But, I just, again, like Acuna has to be the guy to start if he is going to be up here. The veterans, Nick Madrigal, if you bring back Iglesias, if you with McNeil here, all those guys can be on the bench. All of them can be. They're developed players. They could be part-time players. Luisangel Acuna can only be a starter in the major leagues, in my opinion. And then we run into another sort of way where we're talking about the view of how we talked about with Buck Showalter and Billy Epler, of how they kind of just had Mark Vientos just rotting on the bench for like a majority of the season, still shoving Daniel Vogelbach in our faces for the rest of the year, even when they weren't competing. And then Mark Vientos got a little bit of playing time. He showed a little bit of promise there. And then he kind of gets the short end of the stick, but then he starts playing every single day and he was able to develop as a player. And that's something that we're going to see, or maybe not see, with of Luisangel Acuna. Maybe Luisangel Acuna gets a decent amount of playing time for 2 weeks, doesn't play well. You always have options to bring him down. You always have options to option him down. So there's definitely some reversible ways in this way, and that's kind of how you figure out who's going to be the future pieces of this team, whether it is Acuna or whether it is Mauricio, Jet Williams, like whoever it may be. They're going to have to get the chance to earn the job if you're going to do that. And if you can't, we talk about this all the time. If you can't do that, which, yes, maybe McNeil is blocking that out a little bit, they could always buy him out with the flexibility that they do have, but again, it's pretty steep when you're talking about this luxury tax right now. It makes sense to just play him at this current moment. Again, if you can't find a way to bring these prospects in, you're not going to just put them on the bench. We've said this so many times. You use them or you lose them. So again, you don't have to trade anyone right now. You don't have to say, oh, we have a logjam, we have this need and this need or whatever. There's a reason why you never draft for need or you never bring in for need, because you need to have those certain assets to keep things fluid, to trade for other assets and acclimate them to your team. So again, I think if Jeff McNeil wasn't here, this question probably would be a lot easier to answer. But I don't want to see Luisangel Acuna having this very diminished role because of Jeff McNeil. I want him having a big role because he is here, if that makes sense. Has nothing to do it really with my displeasure towards Jeff McNeil recently. It's more of just do not stunt the development of a player. And the way that you do that is having them rot on the bench. So I agree more with the second base options being McNeil and Madrigal. Obviously, that sounds bad from my perspective, of course, but you can't do that to a young kid. Because if Jeff McNeil is here, even though he's rode the bench before because of a Latin pop singer last year who's 35 years old, Luisangel Acuna is going to have to play every day, or at least 6 out of 7 days. And with what they're paying Jeff McNeil, is that possible? I don't think it is. Again, I don't care that Jeff McNeil has he's a left-handed hitter and Luisangel Acuna is a right-handed hitter. I don't want to see a platoon. I don't want to see that crap. So again, because you're never going to be facing enough lefties in this game because it's populated with more righties in this game. So Luisangel Acuna is not going to get the playing time if he's a part-time player. He's not going to get the reps. He's not going to get the development if he's a part-time player. So again, it's the right thing to do to start him off of AAA if Jeff McNeil is on this roster. Unless by some way Jeff McNeil is on the bench, which, again, I also don't want, a $15 million guy on the bench, plus the luxury tax on top of it as of right now. That's just awful roster allocation. We already have that awful roster allocation with Starling Marte being a $20 million platoon DH. So, again, it's clogging up the works right now. It sucks because I do want to see Luisangel Acuna get that chance. But it can't happen because it's not good for him long-term going forward. I just don't believe in that as to where, well, we have a prospect, he's the bench. Now, the bench is supposed to be, these veteran players, part-time players that have shown in the major leagues they can't be an everyday player. What Luisangel Acuna showed so far in the major leagues, everyday player. Now, before I swing it over to you, Frank, I do want to give a shout-out to Darren Rivera coming in with a $4.99. He's asking something about, the Mets trading for one of the Diamondbacks starters. That is a possibility with, contracts close to being up and them signing Corbin Burns, of course, of them acclimating that money. I think it's more of a deadline discussion, of course. I've talked about it with starting pitching. It's more of a deadline discussion, more of a safety net, conglomerate of arms type of discussion. I would love to see them try to do it. I've heard little small flurry of rumors that the Mets have checked in on guys like Zach Gallen and have checked in on guys like that, but nothing of substance to where this is going to get done right now. But if the Mets are in that position at the trade deadline, I think that they're going to go full force for those frontline arms to deepen the rotation and possibly deepen the bullpen with the guys that were in the rotation before they make that trade. So we'll see what happens, but thank you to Darren for that donation. Is very well appreciated. For those of you in here, donations are accepted. They are not permitted. You don't have to. You don't have to pay to watch our show. It's all free here on our YouTube channel, but that was very, very nice of you, Darren Rivera. Thank you for donating. So
Yeah, I was gonna say with
We'll see.
Arizona, I mean, like the other big thing to consider is that they're literally in competition with the Mets. I mean, there is a good chance that like
True.
these teams are going to be battling out for the wild card. So if you're Arizona, it's like, well, why would you want to help your competition and make it more difficult for you to get to the postseason? And you would think that like if Arizona's going to do it, they would want major league pieces back, because when you sign Corbin Burns, when you are a team that doesn't spend that much money, like you intend to compete. I mean, this is a team that, let's not forget, was in the World Series only 2 seasons ago. So like they still want to be very competitive. They have a young core in that position player. So if there's guys that are going to get moved, it's like Jordan Montgomery obviously makes the most sense as someone who could get moved. Like I said, maybe closer to the deadline. Eduardo Rodriguez, like maybe he could get moved. And, I mean, other guys like Merrill Kelly, like Burns not getting moved, and Zach Gallen, like they would have to be out of it. And even if they were, I still feel like it would take a lot, because everybody would want him. Like that would be quite a bidding war, something that I don't think David Stearns is comfortable doing. I mean, because you need to part with some big time pieces if you're going to pull that one off.
Yeah, it's a sweet spot in those types of things of trading for a possible starter. And, if Mets fans want to hear it or not, it's just not going to happen. I don't think it's going to happen between now and opening day. And whether you're comfortable with this as your fantasy team or not, there's 162 games again ahead of you. But the thing is that I think you're going to have to find that sweet spot of guys in our years who their contract is close to being up and they're on teams that are not competing towards the deadline and they could be possible sellers. That probably is a little bit more complicated with the extra wild card spot and, with that overall positioning. We'll see how that does even out. Maybe the Diamondbacks are out of contention. You never know. Maybe San Diego's out of contention. You never know. Those guys are in different, those divisions of all the, that West division. They may be fighting for their lives, of course, with the Dodgers being so good. One of them is going to have to possibly make a trade and sell at the deadline between San Francisco, San Diego, and Arizona. So one of them is going to be out of contention at one point. Colorado doesn't really have great starting pieces that are very, very appealing, but maybe they have a bat or two. Who knows what happens there? I would be, more rooting for the Padres to be out of contention for the types of arms that they have for that going forward. But also San Francisco is another team that you can look at as well. Because I feel like at some point, I don't know how long this is going to take for this to happen, but I feel like at one point, let's just say that, I don't know if it's going to be this year or next year, that Logan Webb will eventually become available. I don't know when that's going to be, but I feel like if they keep going in this mediocre type of feel right now, they're going to probably want to trade some of their best assets. And again, they have some contracts lined up as well. So you don't know what they're going to be doing. Nobody really knows what the Giants are going to be doing, but we're going to be looking at those teams that aren't competing. And, that's definitely going to be our main target for this overall starting rotation. Is there anything else you want to add? And then we'll move on to what's been going on in spring so far in the preview of the first 72 hours.
Yeah, I think it's important just to kind of like really look at the contracts. Like Montgomery's on a 1-year deal of $25 million. Like that's something they really want to get off of. If someone like Gallen, I mean, being on that last year of his deal, like we said, you give Corbin Burns 6 years, $210 million. Like Zach Gallen is another guy who's going to cost you a ton. So it's like, can you afford to pay both of them? Like that is something that you have to consider. I mean, we've seen Milwaukee do something similar, like when they trade Josh Hader, and it sounds crazy when you're a team that's competing, but when you're being realistic and it's like, okay, well, we have a star, what could we get out of them because we know we're not keeping them? Who knows? I mean, weird things can happen. So, I mean, I wouldn't totally rule Zach Gallen out, but like it's just not all that likely. Merrill Kelly, 2 years, $18 million each, and then Eduardo Rodriguez, 4 years at $80 million. Like that's one that I feel like at some point they're going to want to get out of that one. I don't know if he's going to be able to give him 4 years worth, but then again, like if you're the Mets, why would you want to take that back in a certain sense? So it's like
want that
you wouldn't want like the back half of that deal. So, I mean, we'll see. But they're a team that's interesting. They could have guys available, but it's something that you're really not going to know till the deadline.
Yeah, we'll see how this entire thing pans out as to where, you know, if there is a sweet spot in this way, because you also have to consider their performance in the season as well. Because let's say Montgomery bounces back. I don't know if he has the organization behind him, because it seems like they're regretting that as they speak right now. But maybe he becomes a trade target and becomes something that he was in Texas, and he has that type of value. And you know, if a team is not competing in that way, maybe there's other teams that pop up. You know, we've talked about a little bit of the, you know, it has been talked about, not us, but it has been talked about in Major League Baseball of the Pirates listening in on their starters. Jared Jones is somebody who has been talked about as maybe he is available. Like, there's other guys out there. Maybe they become a salary dump, maybe become, you know, expiring free agents. I feel like that's going to be the feel of, you know, the going all in. They'll have a little bit more of a evaluation of what their, you know, staff looks like, of who is going to be a future piece and who is not. And maybe they do acclimate them in some way, because eventually they're going to have to let go of somebody young in that system, because of course we've talked about it from, you know, trading all of these pieces, but there is a lot of value that needs to be taken back by some of these young pieces. If you look at the Mets farm system specifically, a lot of injuries last year. So they're going to have to bring up that stock as well. So it all really has to do with what the sweet spot is at the trade deadline for pitching, because I feel like the Mets farm becomes a little bit more appealing, even though I don't think it's as appealing compared to some of these things, some of these farm systems that can offer more. But it's going to be a little bit more appealing at the trade deadline with desperate teams to get rid of these guys. But also, you know, if there is a piece out there, you know, that has a bounce back season in the minor leagues or has a healthy season, because injuries set back the value of a young prospect. It is time that you can't get back. So again, it's something that you do need to keep an eye on. And again, those types of injuries of your most tradable assets, whether you believe in these guys or not and believe that they are untradeable or not, you had injuries to guys like Jet Williams, Drew Gilbert, some of the younger guys, Jesus Baez. You had some of the other young, I mean, Ronnie Mauricio is another one where he's not in the equation right now because of his health. So there are a lot of these young pieces that the Mets have right now, and it's you know, it really has to be evaluating and internally because of the value that they need to get back because of their injury. And that's the main reason as to why I think the Mets have kind of balked at this situation, because I feel like they're going to have to overpay right now for this starting pitching, when they probably don't have to, as compared to the deadline, or they even out these values because of the amount of injuries they had last year. And I think that that's the main reason as to why they don't want to trade them at the lowest value. And they also want to give them leeway, because there's some positions at the major league level that they don't know the future of. So, you know, I think that it's all about finding that sweet spot at the deadline. But I do think that if they're on pace for, let's say, 100 wins, or on pace for 95 wins and on pace to make the playoffs at the deadline, they're going to go after a frontline piece, because we have seen a lot of these rumors float around in the offseason, the Mets being very opportunistic in that way. I think you're going to get something a little bit higher than a Paul Blackburn at the trade deadline if the Mets are in that position come August 1st, which I think is the trade deadline once again. So, again, good question by Darren Rivera as well. We'll get into some of the other things that we want to discuss before we get into your viewer questions and call-ins. But if there's anything else that you want to add on this pitching scenario, because I feel like it's pretty much pushed to the side at this point, because we're getting ready for spring training now. And unless these rumors start to heat up, I just don't see this happening before the season starts.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots to be determined. I mean, you have to figure out, like, if Clay Holmes if that works out in the rotation. Is Senga healthy? Is Mania? Do we get second half Mania or first half Mania? Is Sproat in our rotation at some point? So it's like, even from the Mets standpoint, they have a lot of question marks themselves where they don't even know what their rotation is yet. So that's why, just like more and more, so it's looking like a deadline kind of thing, because maybe everyone does work out, or you do have injuries, or maybe like a team that we're not talking about yet, they have like a weird first half and they're not doing good, and then all of a sudden guys who we didn't think were available now are available. Then like that could happen too. So there's still, it's just like with pitching, it's just so risky.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it could change, like
it's a disposable position.
Yeah, like
it always will be.
It could change at any moment. So I think they're going to just kind of wait to see what they have before doing anything crazy.
Yeah, and obviously, I think that if the season started with the playoff race, automatically, because, you know, obviously every game counts, you're still going to have to work out the kinks for the first 3 months. Because I feel like once you get to the end of July, or end of June to July, that's when you're starting to evaluate some things, and you're like, okay, this is what we have to do. But at the beginning of the season, there's tons of different opportunities that they can trial and error. You know, if the season wasn't 162 games, I would say go ahead, do it, go all in, get a starting pitcher. But again, it's like you need, you know, a quantity of quality as well. You can't just have the quality to make a fantasy baseball team, especially with pitching, because pitching can just drop dead at any moment. Like we've talked about this, it's a disposable position at this current moment, and it ain't going to change anytime soon with guys throwing as hard as they do. And the overall workload, which has continued to plummet for starters. So again, getting the bang for your buck right now, I'd say it's best to stay put personally and see what you have. But deadline is definitely going to be a more of a topic of discussion for these starting pitchers, and you just kind of have to be patient in that way. I know it's frustrating to see what the Dodgers are doing right now and just bringing in all these pieces, but they're at the level where they can do that, and the Mets just aren't yet. And you know, whether the Mets have the resources or not, the financial resources or not, again, those resources that they have in the farm system, if you're talking about the top 10, a lot of the top 10 does not have much value. So you're probably going to be giving up a little bit more, as to where, let's say, Jet Williams bounces back. Jet Williams will probably right now has the value at his ceiling right now at this current moment because of the injury. Jet Williams probably has the value right now of Jet Williams plus Angel Acuna plus Jesus Baez. Like that's probably the value right now, where, you know, he's dropped because of the injury, and he's going to have to build that value up back because of his overall health. So again, when these guys are at their lowest value as these young players are being acclimated, you know, there's some pieces that are, you know, the sunk costs, in my opinion, McNeil and Marte, those are at the major league level. But when you're talking about the minor league level, you kind of, especially with the surplus, you want to trial and error these things. And I understand wanting to be patient. I get it's frustrating to see what the Dodgers are doing, but if you're going to try to match up with the Dodgers by just off-season moves, you're not going to be able to do that. Because if you look at their off seasons recently, you're not matching that up, especially with just, oh, well, let's just get Dylan Cease. Let's get Michael King. That ain't going to match it up. It's not going. And if that's the whole mentality to win the off season, you know, there's 162 games ahead of you. So I feel like that's the best way the Mets can play it out. It may be frustrating. It may be, you know, rough right now, of course, seeing what the Dodgers are doing, but Mets are just not in the position to, you know, put all chips in right now. And I feel like the reality of the situation is going to start to settle in as we get closer and closer to the deadline. We see who is possibly available at the deadline for them to make those possible moves. Now, speaking of all assets on the table, all of these guys, let's talk about the spring training rosters that just dropped earlier this morning. Afternoon, something around there. But all I know is that I checked my phone and they were out. But anyways, we have about 66 players that were mentioned on the Mets Twitter page on their overall graphic. I will pop them up right here of their pre-spring unit. Obviously, there's other guys that they're going to invite to big league camp. They'll probably sign some guys late. We'll get some announcements in that way, like they said with G-Man Choi and Luke Voigt. Like those were some last-minute add-ons, so maybe there's somebody else there. But when you look at the overall roster tally here, overall, you have 35 pitchers that have been invited to big league camp. Maybe you see some other guys, other young guys. 31 position players, which will be 32 once Pete Alonso does arrive, and we will let you guys know of the Pete Alonso situation. 26 non-roster invites, as opposed to when it comes to the 40-man roster. The whole 40-man roster is here. And the 26-man non-roster invites, including Pete, there's 26 there. And then there's 8 top 30 prospects as this current moment of what it was in 2024. It probably changes going into 2025, and maybe some of these guys are taken out of the top 30. But right now you have 8 prospects that are in the top 30 right now. Currently, some of them were in the top 30 and taken out, like Alex Ramirez. That was somebody who was in their top 30. He's not there anymore. He was, DFA'd from being on the 40-man roster and then re-signed as a minor league free agent. Kevin Parada is going to be featured again. That's definitely going to be a big camp for him to see, where he fits in. Probably will start off in Double-A. Drew Gilbert, we'll get a view of him. Ryan Clifford was invited to big league camp. Of course, Brandon Sproat, the big attraction, the number 1 prospect in the Mets system, who we hope makes a impact on the big league roster somehow going forward in 2025, maybe 2026. Who knows? Dominic Hamill, another guy that has dropped recently. Maybe there is some look as a reliever or a starter. Who knows? And then there's some other guys out there who could be on non-roster invites who could help during the season down the stretch of the year. That's kind of how we saw this whole thing with Jose Iglesias. Dinel Nunez was another one who was good in spring training. And then, we saw him later on in the year and he became a key part to this team before he went down. So you never know, because 26 players are not the amount of players that you're going to be using in 2025. There's going to be plenty more. As for Pete Alonso, the signing is not official yet. Now, before everybody gets a little bit nervous in that way, February 12th is the deadline, not the deadline, but the threshold as to where you can put guys on the 60-day IL. Christian Scott most likely will be the guy who they put on the 60-day IL as the overall corresponding move to add Alonso, so they don't have to drop anyone from their 40-man roster, and they just put Christian Scott there on the 60-day IL. So that is the deadline, or the time where they're eligible to do that, as to why he is not and still on the 40-man roster, because you can't put anybody on the 60-day IL until that certain time. And of course, Christian Scott, main reason why, of course, he's going to miss the entirety of 2025. Maybe he comes back later on, but I don't think that's going to happen, especially with the workload. Of course, him having Tommy John surgery late on last year, as well as the internal brace, which is a long recovery. So we most likely will not see Christian Scott pitch for the Mets in 2025. 2026 is more of him into that equation. There's tons of things that you can unpack of all these other types of storylines we can get into, but I do want to get, more of the look of it, of, some first thoughts of the Mets spring training roster, because I'm sure there's going to be guys that get added to big league camp. There's not a limit of guys that you can bring to big league camp, of non-roster invites that you can get a look of. Frank, I know that there's some catchers in there that might be coming for Francisco Alvarez's job. Jackson Reitz is someone. I think he's going to give a big competition to Francisco Alvarez. Luis Torrens, maybe he gets the starting job. Who knows? But what are you seeing from this roster so far in spring training? It could change. But there are maybe some surprises and some unfortunate, some exciting things. I don't know. But this is just the early look of the roster.
Yeah.
So what do you think?
Yeah, I feel like what we were talking about earlier, as far as like when it comes to Acuna and Tyrone Taylor and these guys, we feel like we have the bench pretty figured out. Like we feel like we know who the position players are going to be. But what I find very interesting from the pitcher standpoint is that there's a lot of guys on here who, like, some of them are not even on the 40-man roster, but have major league experience. Particularly like some of the left-handed relievers you see, like Cabrera and Goss and like all those guys. Even some like Chris Deviensky. Like there are a lot of guys on here who have pitched in the major leagues that are not on the 40-man roster. So like those guys are all going to have a shot at the bullpen. Like we know there's a few guarantees, but not the whole bullpen is guaranteed right now. So I feel like that is where you're really just going to kind of go off of like, okay, well, who has a good spring training? Like if some of these guys impress, then they have a shot at the opening day roster. So that's really where my attention is to. I feel like these other guys are just kind of filler and are just going to play because they're on the 40-man roster and whatever. Like I just don't think that many of these guys have much playing time when you talk about the position players because of how like star-studded the Mets are. Like when you have Soto and Lindor and Nimmo and Alonso, like you have these guys that are just like they're not losing their jobs. Like they are going to be in the opening day lineup. So I feel like the relievers is more so where that's where you're really watching. Like, is there anyone that maybe surprises you that's like, okay, well, here's a guy that maybe was not on our 40 men. Now we have to add him because he has such a good spring training. I feel like things like that kind of too. I mean, we just saw Dylan Covey asked to be released. So he was someone that was on the 40 men at one point. So maybe some other things like that happen too as the year progresses. Guys like, you know what, I'm probably not making the team, just release me. And then that gives you just more things. And then like you said, like that, the surprise of like injuries, like stuff like that happens too. So now maybe a guy had maybe a couple guys had a good spring, but you chose one. Now somebody else is hurt, so now the other guy makes it. So like it just kind of, you get a gauge for like where all these guys are at. And a lot of these guys that we have not seen as Mets too. Like that's the other thing with a lot of these pitchers is that we have not seen them in Met uniform. So it's going to be interesting to see how that goes.
Yeah, I think we do have a lot of major league experience as compared to what we usually get. And then some guys who have kind of been on the cusp of it, maybe they had a few cups of coffee here. But they are definitely going to be important down the stretch of the season because of, the irreversible of the bullpen and everything's like that. You can, switch things in and out. We've seen David Stearns do it countless times. Of course, there are two guys right now on the 40-man roster who could be lined up for the bullpen. One of them was a starter last year that only have one option left. So the Mets right now, their bullpen is a little bit more secure than people think it's going to be. You only have a few spots that get sprinkled in and out. Maybe you have another, a bench spot that you're kind of waiting out for. Maybe it's Jose Iglesias. Maybe it ends up being, who knows, Nick Madrigal ends up being that guy. Or there's somebody else that, flashes some way. I think it's most likely going to be an infielder. Maybe it's Luis de Los Santos, who they DFA'd early on. Who knows? But Tyler McGill and Reed Garrett are the only guys who have options left that can start off in AAA. I don't think Reed Garrett is going to start off in AAA whatsoever. I think he's earned his bullpen spot completely. Right now, Fangraphs has Tyler McGill in AAA already, so he would obviously end up being out of options in that way. But when you have guys who maybe they do struggle, like let's say Danny Young is someone who struggles in spring training, or maybe he struggles in the regular season, he would be possibly DFA'd for another one of these major league capable guys, whether you're talking about Sean Reed-Foley as a possibility, whether you're talking about, Chris Deviensky, who has been linked to David Stearns and Ben Gross when they were back in Houston. Maybe there's somebody else out there that they do attach to it with major league experience to make this bullpen a little bit deeper. So we're going to see the trial and error of whoever is out of options as opposed to these other guys that are pretty much in guaranteed contracts like Diaz, Minter. I don't see Budo starting in AAA. I think it's possibly more common if McGill goes to AAA as compared to Budo. Reed Garrett, I think that he's going to get the job there. But like Danny Young is a possibility with major league options. I don't know if Jose Budo is considered a starter or not. We still have not gotten the full on clarity of that. We also do have, I don't think it's going to happen. I think he's definitely earned the spot despite what I've even said about him, but one option does remain for somebody like David Peterson. So I don't know if that's going to be something that they consider, but I think that he at this point has earned his spot in the rotation, whether it is from the back end or, in a 6-man rotation, no matter what. So we'll see how they kind of configure it in that way. I think that it's definitely going to be in the second unit. You're going to see a decent amount of Kevin Parada because this is probably going to be one of the last stands for him. It has really been a struggle for him. He's older than Francisco Alvarez, and he has had quite the rough minor league career. Let's just say that after being a first-round pick a few years ago. They gave another chance on the minor league contract to Alex Ramirez. I feel like right now he's kind of out of the loop now. And then there's some other veteran pieces that, maybe get the chance. And then we have some guys from minor league camp that I'm sure will get a look, of course. I'm really hoping that we do get a Brandon Sproat start at some point. We get to see some Dominic Hamill as well. We get to see some of these prospects. I don't know if they're doing this spring breakout thing again. Are they? I'm not sure. But we'll get to see a decent amount of these young guys.
Either way.
Yeah. But, we will see how they kind of mix and match these things because it can be very irreversible. Maybe there is somebody who is not on this list of the pitchers that is in the Mets bullpen in the middle of the season. We don't know. And then also somebody that I didn't even mention, Danel Nunez, who I think is going to be on the, he's going to be on the 40-man roster as well. The opening day bullpen as well. I mean, obviously.
You would think, based on
I would think, if he shows, exactly what he was able to show last year, unless there's just a complete meltdown in that way, he was a big part to this bullpen, and he came out of nowhere. So
isn't Brazoban another guy that has minor league options? I feel like that was another thing that they were trying to sell us on when they traded for him, because I mean that's kind of what teams do is like you want to have just as many arms as possible. So it's like the guys that have minor league options probably start in the minors, and then the guys that don't, you at least carry them on the roster to see if they're any good. And then if they're not, then you just call up those other guys. So I could definitely see McGill starting off in AAA. Maybe Brazoban if he doesn't look great again. I could see that happening.
He's got two options.
So
minor league options.
He's a guy I can see going down. Like you said, Reed Garrett, like they trust him in the postseason. So like I feel like he needs to be in the opening day bullpen. Like I'd be really surprised if he
Sean
wasn't.
Reed Foley's a guy also out of options too. So there's going to be somebody that does Foley, get cut.
It's like Sean Foley, he might just end up not on the bullpen because of injuries. So like he's going to get a shot like right away. Yeah. And we'll see. I mean, like, let's not forget that freaking like Jake Diekman and Ottavino and plenty of other guys were on the opening day roster because of minor league options and things like that. So, not that we agree with it, but it's kind of like we said earlier with McNeil. It's like, okay, well, who's in your opening day bullpen is probably different than your playoff bullpen, end of the regular season. Like that's where things really matter.
Yeah, it's all really about guys that get first crack. Personally, out of all the guys out of minor league options who might have the best possibility of making the team, I think the only guy I'm not comfortable having on the opening day roster without options would be Danny Young. That's pretty much it. And we also had these similar things and the similar dilemmas where we had like 2 or 3 guys on the opening day roster because they were out of options. Like, we had those scenarios where Hunter and what is it? I don't think it was Leon because he was a major league contract, but Hunter, Nagosic, we had Michael Tonkin here, we had Yohan Ramirez here, so we had multiple pieces that were battling things in and out, but also in the interchangeable way. Danny Young could also be kind of shoved into the possibility of a left-handed guy who maybe is that second lefty in the bullpen that we've talked about. Genesis Cabrera is somebody that maybe does contend for that spot with Danny Young out of options. what is his name? Anthony Gosey is another one. There's other guys out there who are lefties who could be the second lefty of how they lock that thing in, but I don't think Danny Young is going to be somebody that they're going to be like, okay, well, he's out of options. He's got to be on the opening day roster. Who knows?
He survived the whole regular. I mean, the thing is, they kind of put themselves in that situation. Like I kept complaining about, like the call up, send down with him. Like they just used all of his options basically, like in a short time frame. And I feel like the fact that he finished the regular season with the Mets, and then like he was still like on the playoff roster, and the fact that he's still in the organization, like I feel like he's gonna be on the opening day roster, especially like since he's out of options. Like he's gonna get one. I think he's gonna be one of those guys like it's the first opportunity, and you kind of see what happens. But he's someone that like his role is very different now. He's not the only left-hander in the bullpen.
Yeah, of course. Obviously, the left-hander in the bullpen we acclimated a decent amount of money to, and he deserved it absolutely with AJ Minter. I think he's going to be a really big piece to this.
But Minter could also end up being the setup man too, so then Danny Young could fall more into a traditional like left-handed reliever role if Minter is busy setting up and maybe closing some nights as well.
Yeah, they also have rotation options who also could be in that bullpen too. So it's definitely deep in what they can utilize them for. It all really has to do by performance, because I think that there's going to be some decisions that are going to be made. But we'll see what happens. But there's probably going to be a short leash. But at least we're just not being sold on this optional reliever crap. That Billy Epler tried to shove in our face for that 2023 season, because they have options, they have value. No, they suck and they shouldn't be here. But just because they have options and can be, these types of guys, there's a reason why they have those minor league options. The reason why they haven't been put into the majors, because they're not that good. So again, right now we have a decent amount of guys who don't have options left, but those guys who have less options left, you feel a little bit more comfortable. It feels a little bit more deeper. And then maybe there are some waiver claims or cash trades that they do. Maybe there's a few guys on here that they trade for cash. We saw Austin Adams get traded to Oakland for cash, and then he returned us the favor by mocking the the oh my God thing. Like, dude, nobody knows who you are. But again, we've seen it happen before. Split contracts as well. There's some guys on split contracts that could be on the move as well if they don't have a spot here and they want to pitch somewhere else and get playing time. So you never know. It's all really irreversible. And then also the other factor, the one last other factor, maybe there's just a few more injuries that we don't know of that we get on the first day of spring, because that's the only panicking part of spring. Is just these injuries that just happen out of nowhere, because again, that's the nervous part of it. Let's just say that. Anyways, Lounge Zinger saying, looking at the payroll on the screen, how did we get to $62 million in the tax bill? Spending a lot of money. Basically, the formula for it is the surcharge, but there's also like some kind of like 5% that's added on if you're on like back-to-back years. So it's basically like 60% of the surcharge, and if you go over like this certain range, they start adding like a 5% or something. So it's about 60-ish percent. Probably right now it's like 70-ish, 72% of 79 million. So that it's about 62 plus the total payroll, which is at 320 right now. And obviously the Mets wanted to have it at some kind of a certain number, mainly just because of, the draft pick compensation, things like that. But, we will see how we look at it from the view of spring training, because we haven't even gotten to pitchers and catchers reporting yet. But the overall roster of the first look of it, we will definitely go into a lot more storylines as well of what happens with certain players, because there's a lot of, deeper possibilities. But we will see if we will be able to, piece together a roster that's deep enough. And there's always going to be moves throughout the season like we saw last year. of course, with, pieces of, the spring training guys or guys that they claim off of waivers. You never know. There's going to be tons of moves that get, acclimated at some point during the roster. So it's Pete's 30 million, effectively like 50. Not necessarily. It's about 27 million in the luxury tax hit. But then it's more of just the surcharge from the surcharge. So it's not like, from traditional sense, yes, you probably can play it as such.
He also had the $10 million signing bonus too.
Yeah, you have the $10 billion signing bonus, so that's a different type of pool. But yeah, I think we'll see how they acclimate some things. But I do want to get into some of your calls. We'll wrap it up with one more call from our guy Caution, who is one of our top donators to this stream. For some reason, he is so rich. Anyways, we will try to make out some of the stuff because, again, some of the translating on the overall transcript sometimes comes out from different words here. But we will try to get to as many call-ins as we can in the future. But we're just going to stay with the one today. Just a reminder for any of you out there, if you want to call into the show, our hotline is now open 24/7 for any comments, questions, etc. regarding our New York Mets. Please go ahead and call us at 845-208-5677 and send us a voicemail under 3 minutes long. Please refrain from using offensive or derogatory language. All calls will be pre-screened for obvious reasons, and numbers will be blocked if you violate any of these rules. It is a one-strike policy. Send us a voicemail at any time. That's 845-208-5677. One more time, 845-208-5677 for a chance to be a part of our show. So I am going to just move things over here. Our guy Caution has some words for us, and we will see our caller right here. Here we go. Let's see what Caution's got for us.
Hello, Caution Frank. This is Darren. What do you think is the ceiling for Vogt and Jonathan? What type of starter do you think they'll be? And do you think the Mets are into the last few states if he doesn't sign with Toronto? My lineup would be Lindor, Vientos, Soto, Alonso, Nimmo, Marte or Winker, Alvarez, McNeil, Siri or Taylor. I can see Vientos getting more fastballs with Lindor leading off and Soto batting behind him. Thank you. You guys have a great show. Keep up the good work.
All right. I'm being corrected here that was Darren, not Caution. It said Caution in the transcript here, so my bad. Anyways, Darren, that is actually some really good questions that you guys have. The overall ceiling of some of our prospects. I think he's saying Sproat and Jonah Tong, two of our possibly our most regarded prospects. I would say pitching wise, as of right now, of the leaderboards, we'll see, what we think about some of these young guys going forward. It doesn't look like Jonah Tong is on the spring training, but we will get to probably see.
We saw him in the new uniform today pitching. Yeah.
So again, we'll definitely get a decent look at him. Maybe we don't. Who knows? I think there's definitely some ways that you can look at the ceiling for some of these pitchers, but you really just never know with whether it's health or volume or whatever you can get from these guys. But when it comes to Sproat, I think that there is a little bit of an ace. There is an ace ceiling for him. I don't think it's to the level of Paul Skeens, but I think that it is to the level of, you know, a frontline piece that definitely could be reliable down the stretch. If he were to be a somewhat of an ace, I think it's going to be a little bit more of a late blooming type of scenario for him to get, you know, his full stride, but you never know with the health with these guys. But as for Sproat, Frank, is that kind of the look of it where he could be a frontline starter? You know, you never know. I think that they have high hopes for the kid, but I don't know. I think we all really just have to see what comes of it, if he grabs his footing in AAA or not. But I think that there's definitely some high hopes there where he can jump, you know, the vassal of the group or the, you know, these other guys who we had that seemed like just back end guys in the major leagues. There's definitely more of a legitimacy from a guy like Brandon Sproat who has the type of stuff that he does. So, Frank, what is your thoughts on, you know, Brandon Sproat overall as prospect? Then we'll get into Jonah Tong.
Yeah, no, I mean, he definitely has a lot of potential. I feel like not us just from a Mets perspective, but you're seeing like on a national scale that like he's getting more attention more and more. Like we see like all these different places rank their top prospects in all of baseball. Like he's in the top 50. So he's someone that's getting a lot more attention just from everywhere. And like you said, I mean, that stuff is just not common when it comes to starting pitchers. Like starting pitchers shouldn't have that kind of velocity. The point that you and I have both made is like we are fearful of the eventual Tommy John. Like we feel like it's bound to happen. It happens to all the pitchers, and you feel like him with the kind of stuff that he has, he becomes like just even more susceptible to it. It feels just because like so unnatural to be throwing that hard and that often as a starting pitcher. So I mean that's like my one worry I have, but like there is potential there, and he could be like a huge story for the Mets. Is like we're talking about like, oh, you know what, this team could really use another frontline arm. If somehow he is that frontline arm, you don't have to trade anything. Like that would be the best case scenario for this team when it comes to pitching. But I mean, he's someone that we're gonna have a close eye on. Like it's going to be a very big spring for him. But like you mentioned, it comes down to consistency because he had starts where he looked great in Syracuse and starts where he got bombed, and it would kind of alternate, lose the strike zone a little bit. So it's like he does need to find that overall consistency. So there is no rush. It's like we don't know the exact month we might see him, but the hope is that we do see him sometime this season for sure.
Yeah, of course, and that's the same really goes for Blade Tidwell, who had a great season in Double A, excuse me, and in Triple A struggled as well, but in a little bit more of a sample size. So we'll see how it all pans out, and I do think that when it comes to Sproat, there is definitely a time table as to where maybe there is a point where he does get Tommy John surgery, and I'm not saying that I'm predicting it. That he's going to get it, but it's just a prerequisite with pitchers. And it, again, I talked about this on Twitter, and some people were, you know, asking me about it, and I actually put out, you know, my main fear with him, but I don't want to speak it into existence. It's like when it comes to pitchers that have not had Tommy John surgery yet, they scare me more than guys that have had it already. With just how this, you know, game has elevated the way that it has. And I feel like there is a fear as to where when we need him most, or when we need to, you know, call up the depth a little bit more and, you know, he's ready, you know, that maybe that does end up coming to fruition. We saw some things about Christian Scott where they were trying to avoid a lot of the workload with him and they were trying to settle things down. You also had a very ordinary workload with Brandon Sproat last year. He had a career high in innings. You know, this is, you know, an arm that I feel like they definitely have, you know, high hopes for a guy like that. They have high hopes for a guy like Christian Scott, and hopefully he comes back healthy and ready to go. But again, this is the development of pitchers with, you know, not just developing pitches and pitching better and pitching well. It's all about the workload too, because again, at any point you could hear something different about a pitcher. There's only a top 1% in there that rarely gets hurt. There's always an issue with a pitcher. There's always caution with a pitcher. So you never know. And maybe those injuries keep him from reaching that ceiling. Who knows? That's always been something with pitchers, no matter what, especially with how it's accelerated. As for Jonah Tong, a lot younger. I believe he is like 20 years old, about to be 21 or something. It's going to be a while until we see Jonah Tong up here. And I'm all for something like that. Maybe it's, maybe it's as early as next year, 2026, maybe see 2027. But I do think that there's a little bit more of a thought of durability in a guy like that who doesn't throw as hard. But I'd say that if you're talking about from overall pitch shape, Jonah Tung is probably one of the best we've had in that sense. If you're talking about overall stuff in general, Brandon Sproat. I think that there's a mid-rotation type of ceiling when you're looking at somebody like Jonah Tung. But there could be somewhat of a breakout with his type of stuff as to, he still does need to develop. But again, a fastball with over 20 inches of induced vertical break is, not something to just scoff at of, well, he only throws it 94, 95. Like, again, that's something that he could possibly develop. Maybe he develops some velocity in that sense as well to make himself even more of an effective piece. But I think Jonah Tung is one of those pieces that they do think is a good piece long-term down the road. And they have high hopes for him. But again, there's going to be a little bit more time because I think that the workload is, again, something that they're going to try to offset there. With his overall health and health of just all pitchers. Nola McClain is another one out there who started off as a reliever in college. That's another piece that you can look at. It all really just has to depend on the timing. That's really it. But as for Jonah Tung, I think that there is a better comparison out there probably. But I think that there is... I don't really want to put any major league ceiling on him of a specific player, but because he is just so young and we're not really seeing those comparisons where we can piece it all together. But if you're talking about like mid-rotation guys at this current moment, as he continues to, maybe be a helium type of pitching prospect, I think that's kind of where we are at right now because he is so young. And you usually see that these mid-20 guys in their mid-20s develop as pitchers. Jonah Tung is, he's at a very, very young age. He's at the age of some of these shortstop prospects, like 1 year out of the draft. So it's going to take a while until we see Jonah Tung, but it's definitely another guy to look forward to, obviously, in this farm system as they continue to build up the pitching in this organization. There's definitely talent here. It's all about just finding the sweet spot with the timing. I don't know if that's how you feel about Jonah Tung. I just think that there's definitely an upside there, but we definitely need to see a little bit more. He's just very, very young, and we'll see how he kind of transfers in that way.
Yeah, he turns 22 in June. He was drafted in the 7th round, so he's been a high riser for sure. When you draft a guy in the 7th round, you don't think they're going to become a top 10 prospect, but he has with how well he's performed. He's only gotten a couple starts in AA Binghamton so far. He's done really well, but he needs to get a lot more reps in AA, and as we know, then get called to AAA, because that's what happened with Sproat. Like, Sproat was great in AA, so they call him to AAA, and that's where we see the inconsistencies. So for Tung, it's like, okay, well, now he's got a year in AA, see how that goes. He does great. Come to AAA, see how that goes, and then you have the major league. So it's like since like you said, he is on the younger side. He has a little more obstacles and hurdles to overcome before he can reach the majors. But so far, he is off to a great start, and he is rising through the system very quickly. So he's one that, like everyone else, I am very excited for. But we still just don't know quite yet. Like, he still has some time. Because like you said, he is younger.
Yeah, there's swing and miss numbers there. There definitely are. They're, nearly through the roof there. Over almost like 13 strikeouts per 9, 34% of batters that he struck out. With that kind of herky-jerky motion that he does have, there might be some, concerns for some control. But again, as he continues to develop as a prospect or as a pitching prospect, we will see what happens in those higher levels. When it comes to AA, I feel like there's definitely more of a established, range in this way to face those types of hitters. When it comes to AAA, there's definitely going to be a little bit more of an even out, and we'll see where he does sustain to in the AAA level, but I don't think he's going to be called up to AAA anytime soon. I think that there's going to be a decent amount of innings they're going to try to get from him from AA. 2026 is probably the earliest. 2027 is probably the latest at the trajectory that he is going. regarding any health. But he does have a lot of tools that can show you as a very stable pitcher. Good enough control, of course, really good command, gets a lot of chases, good secondary stuff. Again, like I said, a fastball with over 20 inches of induced vertical break. I think that the numbers are there, but we're going to just have to see a little bit more in the upper echelon of levels in the minor leagues before we start establishing him as the rotation guy to give us some of that stability. But I think that the ceiling is high. We just need to see more to see where the ceiling will be, if that makes sense. I think, he's just in that younger stage as compared to a Sproat or even Nolan McLean, who I believe is also like pretty older than him. I'm not sure. He's
McLean is
23,
older,
about to be 24.
and he's still adjusting to like the not being a two-way player anymore. So he's like, even though he's older, as far as like where he's at pitching wise, as far as the seasoning and development, he's still like not where he should be technically at that age. So they're in a pretty similar scenario. A lot of times they're ranked like right with each other. It's usually like when the Mets farm is being ranked, it's like McLean and Tong are like one apart. There's even, I talked about one of my videos, like a top 100 list where they were like ranked like one apart. So, I mean, not even just in the Mets farm system, but just like in all farm systems, they are like right now ranked very similar.
Yeah, we'll see. How some of these guys come up through the system. We already have seen the Mets be aggressive with a lot of these promotions, so we will see how they do fix things in and out. We saw, Christian Scott get his chance early on in the year, but they were very cautious with him. I don't want to see a point of emphasis with this position, like we have said, with the game accelerating the way that they do. I don't want to see them just burn these arms out completely. It's going to be a process in that way of what these guys could possibly handle. And, yes, the everyday reps is something that we talk about of, pitching every 5 days or something like that. But it's a lot different with a lot of these younger guys. The veteran guys in this game, they're used to that, and that's kind of how they were brought up through their career. It's a lot different with these guys. So the conditioning, the overall workload, it's something that they're going to have to, zero in on of what these guys could possibly handle. And maybe that splits you up into the starter or reliever, or maybe that splits you up into, a frontline piece that is reliable or a frontline piece that isn't so reliable and underperforms and is not that big of a contributor. So we'll see how they look at from the pitching prospects. I definitely think that it's a little bit more deeper from the side of pitching prospects. When it comes to the position players, I think it's a crapshoot right now with their value kind of tanking, like we talked about it, with their overall health. But I think that that's really pretty much it as for the farm system. Thank you for Darren for calling in. Of course, we will get into more call-ins as the show goes along. We'll have a little bit less to talk about them in the meat of the show, but we're going to end it off here. Frank, I will go to you of any last stuff before we kick it into gear for pitchers and catchers, and we turn it into spring training coverage for our podcast.
Yeah, I mean, like we said, we're just getting closer and closer with each stream. Like we said, mid-February, football is over. It is baseball's turn to have some fun. And, as we're going to go, we're going to see, like you said, more interviews, just more guys working out, and just seeing, like, what all the updates are, what all the reports are. And like we said, just around Major League Baseball, like, plenty of guys still available. Like, I saw people in the chat talking about Bregman. Bregman's not coming to the Mets, but he's still unsigned. Like, there's plenty of relievers unsigned. So, I mean, there still is more things that could happen for a lot of teams. So, I mean, they got to decide soon, though, because like we said, especially for the bullpen side, like, pitchers are reporting this week. So, you always want to, like, have your guys when you go. But it's just been, like, a very slow market just all off season. It's felt that way.
Yeah, it's definitely been at a pace of more thought put in it from a lot of these, front offices, and more of just the overall market of each position. I think has really been something that it's really been emphasized, and it's definitely, with half of the league being represented by Scott Boras, it's, there's a slowdown there. We saw the Boras 4 or Boras 5 last year. There's still Boras clients out there that are available. So, you never know. There are some notable names that are still unsigned, so we'll see what happens in that process. But we are getting closer and closer to knowing what this team is going to look like this year. Regarding any other surprises, we have a lot of it lined up right now. We have a lot of young guys to watch as well during spring training. Things like that. We'll get ready for it. And obviously with the start of spring training and the offseason being pretty much completely done, periodically wise or chronologically wise, next episode will be our grades overall for off-season moves, things like that. We'll also go into, whatever other news that we talk about, that we heard from the media. And then the next episode after that is going to be a pretty special one, I believe. It hasn't been completely confirmed, but there could be a very special guest who joins us who hasn't been on our show before, for some overall other spring training coverage before it gets into full swing. So stay tuned for that. As for everybody in here, thank you for watching, listening. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. For those of you watching and listening on playback and you want to join the conversation live in the future, make sure to subscribe to the Mets Weekly YouTube channel. Turn on post notifications to not miss when we go live. And thank you guys so much for the support throughout all off-season long. We're not going anywhere. We're moving on to spring training. And overall, all of this coverage continues, and we will be here to cover it. As for if the Mets make some crazy move or there's some news that comes out there, that does shock the world in the Major League team, we will be sure to go live for it. But other than that, we will be live every Monday, 7 o'clock Eastern Time. Make sure to follow Mets Weekly on X and on TikTok. Follow all of us individually, including our third co-host, Andrew, who could not make it today. All the links are in the description. And, of course, finally, let's go Mets. We are close to Major League Baseball being played in Port St. Lucie. And we will see you guys next time.